Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 5 of The Last Battle, How Help Came to the King.
Do you know what word is in here that I've never seen before?
No.
I
don't know. What
Firkin. Firkin.
What is a firkin? Tell us about it.
It's a container of wine.
Yeah.
And it comes from the original scripture, don't try to put new wine in old firkins. It's the original Greek.
Really?
No.
Oh, it's like I did not know that at all. That part. You never heard the word firkins before?
No.
I think I've only heard it in this like kind of very like fantasy context. I don't know if I've ever heard it like in real life.
Like if my dog had a brother, that would be his firkin. And then wait a firkin minute. Everything works with that.
Oh my goodness!
But that's at the end of the chapter. Let's start with the beginning of the.
Okay, that is the end of the chapter. That's well done. Do you have this in your notes? I'm gonna look at your iPad right now. You do not. Nope, you don't have any notes there.
No notes.
Okay, which shows how well prepared you are for this episode.
Oh, I'm very well prepared. I
Really?
listened to this weeks ago in audio format.
Okay,
not the audio drama format. We'll get to that later.
I guess that is true. Yeah.
Much later.
No, but this year we'll get to it. This year.
I was so engrossed in it that I actually blew past the beginning of chapter 6.
Oh,
and I was really starting to get into it. And I thought, no, I'm not supposed to go this far.
You're not. Yeah.
Took a step back, and then I just right before we recorded this, I read it so that I would have the experience of both.
Well, did you? Last chapter I told you that 2 children were coming. Did you think we'd get Eustace and Jill Pole again?
No,
did not. 3 books of Eustace.
Yeah. Honestly, I had no idea what was happening, what was going to happen in the last battle. And I certainly did not expect for us to eat. I didn't think we were ever going to see Peter again.
Okay.
But we've already had an interaction with him.
Yeah.
And now we're getting more Eustace.
It's so funny that Eustace and Jill are the children of this book. It's always felt a little weird to me. Not in a bad way, but I think when you think of the Chronicles of Narnia and you're like, name 3 characters from the Chronicles of Narnia, just you ask anybody on the street, most would be like, please leave me alone, and 2, what's the Chronicles of Narnia? But if you then, I don't know, you go to a Christian homeschool convention or a classical education conference or just your church, and you ask those people.
I don't know. I feel like we every year read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
At school?
Yeah. It was like Remember the Titans for us. We would watch that every year.
That's true. We read it in my elementary school.
Yeah, we didn't read the entire Chronicles of Narnia. I basically have heard The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe a gazillion times by high school. But I feel like a lot of people know it. Like I even have a friend who's originally from Russia, and he read it in Russian. And it has like a worldwide.
So maybe there's more people. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic about that here. And obviously, we've always said this. It's still, these books are very popular, not just in the religious or Christian world. I'm not trying to really imply that in my joke, but I think if you were to ask people name 3 characters, I think very, very few people name Eustace or Jill.
Yeah,
I would
think
agree with that. Before Eustace and Jill, I think you get a Lucy, I think you get an Edmund, you get a Peter. Mm-hmm. At least those 3. Maybe not Susan as much, but you get at least those 3. What's really funny about those with Peter is Peter's in 2 books, and that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, we see him a little bit here, and I can't remember if he even got a line in Horse and His Boy, but he's a main character in only 2 of the books.
Yeah.
Whereas Jill and Eustace is a main character in 3 of the books. Jill Pole, a main character in 2 of the books. Right. But I think a lot of times they're kind of forgotten here. And I think some of this is, in relation to the fact that I would still argue Tyrion is the protagonist of this book. It is not Jill and Eustace. Again, and we'll talk about this.
They're more supporting.
Absolutely. And as we go through this chapter, we'll talk about this. Even the way that we hear about kind of how the kids came into this world, we're still getting it more from kind of a third-person limited perspective of Tyrion kind of hearing and receiving this, which is really interesting, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's one of the many examples of Lewis doing something different, still using a little bit of the same stuff, but mostly like a different approach.
kind of, funnily enough, Jill and Eustace almost feel a little like foreign here. They feel a little distant to me as a reader, and I think it is because we're getting so much more from. They're distant to Tyrion. These are strangers. This is like, to us, this would be, I don't know, Justinian and Theodora just showing up, 1,500 years after their deaths, and you're like, hey, we're here to help you. And you're like, wait, y'all are here to help me, right? And here with the same thing he's experiencing with, you helped my, 200, for them it's only 200 years.
Right.
Like 200 years ago, y'all were here. Wow. Y'all are legends.
Yeah. And this is also the furthest into the future we've been at this point, right? And it's also the two of the youngest kids. It's the youngest kids.
Yes, they are the youngest.
In real world time. I think I was also, just because the last one we did was The Magician's Nephew, I think I was primed for, let's have those two characters.
You thought they might come back.
Yeah, let's have those two characters for another book, and then it's a little more evenly spaced out. But I'm excited to see what this is, because I think that there's probably a reason that it's these characters in particular.
Sure. I will say that our friends over at NarniaWeb.com, they have listed here some dates and some ages. So the last battle, do you want to take a guess for us? The last battle, what year in Earth years, not Narnian years, what year is this taking place?
1963.
1963. So that's...
No,
you've guessed so wildly off that this is no longer fun.
I would say let's remember 48.
Okay, that's much better. This is okay because wardrobe is 40. So I'm like, you've gone west 23 years into the future, which did not help me. No, so this is 1949. So you're off by a year on your second guess. Much better.
On my first real guess, but yeah.
So Peter is 22, Edmund 19 here, Lucy is 17. Diggory Kirk, the professor, 61. Polly is 60. How old do you think Eustace and Jill might be? Edmund is 19. Think about maybe his difference between him and Eustace. How old do you think Eustace and Jill are?
Maybe Eustace at 16, Jill at 15?
They're both 16. Just a good guess, all right? Nice. Which is also, if you look through the ages... that
I should guess more seriously first. I feel like that would have a better... And
remember, a lot of these are not just... Narnia Web is having, and they've done a very good job with this, they do have to make some guesses, but some of this actually comes from Lewis's own timeline of Narnia, where he lists, for instance, the birth years of Edmund and Lucy as 1930 and 1932, but he said there's really only 1 year's difference, so we have to assume that it might be like one was born in December, one's born in January or something, something like that. Yeah. We don't quite know. But we believe these years are pretty close to exactly what Lewis is thinking. Interesting that Eustace and Jill, both 16, we have never had teenage protagonists either. I mean, Eustace and Jill, the last time we saw them, they're both 9 years old.
Right.
This is like a significant amount of time has passed. Peter in Caspian was only 14, right? Caspian in Don Treader, I guess, was 16, but he was king at this point, a little bit different. So,
and played by a 42-year-old man.
Oh, exactly. That is very true.
Tobey Maguire.
And so how interesting that Eustace and Jill come back as 16-year-olds to help out Tyrion, who we believe we're guessing is about 25-ish or so.
Now that I'm hearing this, it makes a lot more sense how mature everyone sounds in these first interactions in this chapter specifically.
When I think 16-year-olds, I too also think how mature they are.
Super mature. Well, these are English 16-year-olds.
Oh, they're English 16. And
did I tell you what the kid said outside of the gift shop?
Is this a joke? Is this
a real thing?
Joke? Oh, okay.
I was in England. I was at a gift shop, and the gift shop was separate from...
Wait, I thought you went to Scotland.
I went to Scotland. We took a bus into England.
I didn't know you spent any time
very
in
soft border, easy to cross, back and forth. We went into England for basically 5 hours.
Okay.
And I heard this kid. This kid was part of a school group, very young, maybe I'm guessing 7 or 8. With a teacher, like a whole group. There's like 30 kids and a teacher, and they're walking out of the gift shop and they're headed back toward the main place, like these Roman ruins. And he tugs on his teacher's sleeve and he goes,
"They're robes, I assume."
Well,
right?
yeah,
they're all wearing robes.
It's easier to hide the wand.
Yeah.
He goes, "Mr. S, are we going to stop by the castle on our way out? I'm a trifle parched."
No, he didn't.
He did.
He said, "I'm a trifle parched."
And I thought, oh my gosh,
I love that.
We are not ready for another war.
I think we'll be on their side, so we'll be okay.
If they try to get us to pay 300 years of back taxes,
we're in big trouble.
We wouldn't win on an argument.
We're in big trouble. Yeah. they can just run at us with those very tall hats that they give to their guards, and we're this is a good.
Oh,
Have
those
you
are
seen
disgusting.
that funny? I don't like to do this on the podcast, but it's kind of. I just saw it recently. Have you seen that funny video? It's been out for years of that little girl who has like. They've told her that the elf on the shelf has drawn on her, and she's a little English girl. She's probably about 4 years old. She's like, "It's not funny. It's not funny." But like, I think for us as uncultured Americans, we don't hear a lot of children with those accents. We have lots of actors and stuff.
Right.
And so whenever like my brain has subconsciously kind of learned that the British accent applies to adults, right? Like I think it's a Manchester accent from, I don't know what the adjective for Manchester.
That's the other thing I learned is there's no such thing as an English accent.
They're
all these like specific.
They're very geographic, yes.
And it makes sense. Like, there's no American accent. What people usually do is a California or a like deep Southern accent.
But what's so interesting about this and again, you and I are not experts on this, and I'm not pretending to be, is that England is so small. Like the diversity of accents. So like, here in Virginia, we have pretty different accents from even my wife's family in Eastern North Carolina, right? They have very Southern accents. My in-laws very much have a little bit of a drawl, right? Whereas here, we're kind of in the mid-Atlantic. We've been told by listeners that you and I have somewhat of a Southern accent, but you and I certainly don't hear it. And if I were to go hang out with a friend of mine, I went to a wedding in Alabama a few years back, and I'm like, nobody talks like me here, right? Y'all have real Southern accents, but like Alabama to Virginia is kind of far. Like Manchester to Liverpool is not that far away. Manchester to London. And those are two distinct, like even me, again, an uncultured American, can tell, maybe not which one is which, but I can tell that they are different in a way that I don't know if I get, found somebody in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and I say, okay, here's an accent from, Virginia, and here's an accent from Tennessee. I don't know that they would be able to tell the difference, right? Yeah. So how interesting.
My favorite recent one is South London, but it's pronounced Souf. South.
Oh, really?
South
okay.
London. Yeah, I like that one a lot.
We do that with Norfolk here.
Yeah.
No one in Virginia says Norfolk, right?
I do.
No, you don't.
I do.
Well, you're from North Carolina, so that's why.
You're
not one of us.
Because I don't want it to sound like I'm saying Firkin.
Oh, okay, exactly. So we have here chapter 5. We've talked about these characters. We've talked about some accents. We've talked about how these are teenagers going around with a young adult, and what we're seeing is really upsetting in many ways. Let's go ahead and jump into the chapter summary. It's an odd chapter, so I have that. Are you ready, Philip?
Let's hear it.
Jill Pole and Eustace Scrubb appear out of thin air before King Tyrion. They quickly unfasten his bonds and make their way away from the evil stable. The king mentions a solitary tower in Lantern Waste that will provide shelter and protection as they strategize their next moves. On the walk towards this tower, Eustace explains how they arrived in Narnia. The 7 friends determined that they could use Uncle Andrew's old Atlantean rings to allow Jill and Eustace to return to the land. Peter and Edmund traveled to London to retrieve the rings from the Garden of Diggory's old house. After the rings were found, Eustace, Jill, Diggory, Polly, and Lucy took a train towards London, but they were whisked away before the train arrived. After arriving at the tower, Tyrion, Eustace, and Jill disguised themselves as Calormans before sitting down for a meal and a firkin of wine.
That's right.
That was already at 149 words, so I didn't have that extra one. I just threw that one out there.
I was going to say, because we have people check. Not really. No one's ever checked. Have you ever snuck in an extra word?
No, I legitimately have not.
I didn't know how to tell you this before, but in season 3, I did 153 words.
Ooh, yeah. You know what? I'm going to have to go back and find out which one it is, and we're deleting that one from the archives.
Good luck.
Because someone deleted it from the Jedi archives.
Wonderful. The mind of a child.
All right, let's talk about this. Jill and Eustace
Speaking of Obi-Wan Kenobi, did you know that Ewan McGregor's brother's in the Royal Air Force and his code name is OB2?
That's kind of cool.
Isn't that great?
I like that.
There's a picture of them together in a jet.
So as we talk about Jill and Eustace here, I actually, before we dive into the narrative itself, I want to talk about the names of Jill and Eustace. I came across this in David Downing's book, Into the Wardrobe, And I wanted to read a little bit about how Lewis has very astutely chosen the names of many of his different characters. I want to read a little bit from this because I was thinking a little bit about how similar Tyrion sounded to Rilian, about the fact that we had Diggory and Polly, and we have an odd name like Eustace, but then pretty common names like Jill and Peter and Susan and Lucy. So here's what David Downing writes. Lewis admitted to having old-fashioned taste in poetry, and his preferences in sounds reflect traditional poetics. The consonants L and R, called liquids, and M and N, called nasals, are usually considered the most musical, soft-sounding tones. In all of Lewis's books, characters and places associated with the good are dominated by these melodious consonants: Melendil, Aslan, Ramandu. Other consonants, such as F, V, and Z, called fricatives, and then P, B, J, K, T, and D, called plosives, right? We know about that from recording.
Yeah.
Are considered...
Gotta have a plosive guard.
Yeah, they're considered more prosaic and harsh sounding. Lewis's bad characters tend to have dissonant sounding names that contain harsher consonants. The devils in the Screwtape Letters, with names like Toadpipe, Slubgob, illustrate the point. But so do negative characters in the Chronicles, with names like Gumpus, Nickabrick, and Edith Jackal. Kings of Narnia generally have liquid names: Rilian, Aerlian, Tyrion. So when someone comes along called Jadis or Miraz and claims to be the rightful ruler of Narnia, the very sound of that name should arouse suspicion. Caspian is a good Narnian king with a bad lineage, tell marine pirates, and the sound of his name, poetically speaking, begins badly, Cass, but ends well, PN.
I wondered about that.
Yeah, Caspian.
I wondered if there are any sneaky characters that appeared good at first, but then ended bad, where it would be the reverse.
So again, that wasn't necessarily related to Eustace and Jill, but it was as I was looking up these names, I came across this.
Yep.
And Tyrion obviously does still fit in, so I wanted to share that because that's so interesting. In fact, even Downing earlier in this chapter had mentioned that Lewis loved the names in Tolkien stories. Obviously, Tolkien was always thinking about this. Where names in particular that Lewis liked were Tenuvial and Silmaril, both from the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
So...
I was just thinking when you were reading those, Tolkien's names are so good. And part of it is he wrote the entire history and has so much meaning behind everything and has developed entire languages around it. Mm-hmm. But it's cool to see that Lewis also has a good system.
And again, it's
going here.
And Downing is correct to point out that it's a poetic mindset that leads to this, right? It's thinking about how do these words actually sound, which is why it's so important to read these books out loud. It is great to, and I'm a huge advocate for reading books out loud, even if you're by yourself. You should. Here's something I'll recommend for any of our listeners to do, whether you're with a spouse or a friend or a family member or a child, is sometime this next week read something out loud. It doesn't have to be a whole book or whole chapter. Just find something and read it out loud, because it's something that we don't do enough of in our kind of day and age. And we think of it as, it's the thing we do to kids because they can't read yet, not something we should do because it's a great way to learn and engage literature.
Especially the older the literature is, the better it
Absolutely,
sounds
yeah.
out loud. Yeah.
You and Sarah read a lot out loud, don't you?
We do, yeah. So we read Matilda to each other.
Okay.
All the way through. And then we read a lot of Harry Potter, but didn't finish that.
Too long?
No, we got married and just
magic wasn't there anymore.
Magic is still in the books. No, we just have had more.
Sure.
We've had other things going on. The other part is it kind of helped during COVID, but then now everybody's not stuck in their homes.
Fair enough.
As much. But I love hearing stuff read out loud and trying. It's hard to read out loud for me. Just I feel like my mouth gets really dry really fast. Mm-hmm. Does that happen to you when you read? That's like my number one fear about being a parent.
I
dry mouth while I read.
Not really, but I think about how much of my life I spend reading out loud.
Yeah.
I mean,
and talking.
Yeah, I mean, I always, that first week of school, usually the first day of school every year, I always lose my voice because I haven't gotten back into it. But then usually by day 3, it's back to normal. Yeah. I mean, I spend a lot of my life talking. I really enjoy the sound of my own voice. So, all right, well, let's talk about this chapter itself. How does it begin for us, Phil?
With the word "but."
Okay. You got anything else for us?
Well,
that is exactly how one of my students would answer. Like, thanks so much. Let's keep going.
Keep moving. Well, it's good to know I'm on par with your middle schoolers.
No, these are 5th graders. Now, remember this. Now I'm teaching lower school again.
Oh my God, I cannot keep up.
Yeah, sorry.
You keep switching.
I was middle school. Now I'm back at lower school.
Where were you 3 weeks ago?
No. This entire year I've been teaching lower school.
All right.
Last year I was teaching middle school.
Okay. So 5th grade to you is lower school.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, independent schools do things differently. Fifth and 6th grade was middle school at my last school. This year, 5th and 6th grade is a lower school here. Yeah, it's all. The ages stay the same, just the names change.
I think it would be amazing if you could keep a kid in middle school, like just keep changing it on them.
Middle school,
and then as soon as they turn 21, you switch the drinking age to like 25 or something.
Sure.
Just like, for our brains, probably what it should be, but it will never change.
Right,
chapter 4 ended with just misery. And now Tyrion, with a sentence that I said starts with but his misery did not last long because Tyrion is now about to be rescued by 2 children.
And it actually takes a while for Lewis as the narrator to even name them. We just get the boy and the girl until they actually introduce themselves about a third of the way through the chapter. It's not till we hear the boy say, "I'm Eustace Scrubb, and this is Jill Pole." Throughout that and through this entire escape, they don't even, introduce themselves. Instead, they are, like you said, very mature and like, look, we can introduce ourselves later. Let's get you out of here because we don't know where your captors are.
There's a hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
They need to get out of where they are, out of the immediate danger. They need to get shelter and food. And so they share the food, they're on their way to shelter, and that's when the introductions happen.
Yeah, it's actually, a lot of people don't know this, but that is in Maslow's triangle right there. Yeah. It's you don't see it a lot of times, but there is, they run away from your animal captors.
Right,
It's very important. You can't self-actualize.
And then you need your victuals.
Yeah, exactly.
Your victuals, and then you need to get to a safe tower.
So they do escape. He does say, "Hey, I have this tower," which I want to pause for a minute and say that one of my favorite things in all of the Chronicles of Narnia is this tower.
Oh,
I have a weird affinity for it. Like it holds a very special place in my heart, and that is because, not to talk too much about where we're going next, but one of the things I love. Let me pause first and say one of the things I love about Tolkien, for instance, is that there's so many places that we visit multiple times. There's so many places that even within the same book, right? For instance, within The Lord of the Rings, how often do we spend time at Hobbiton or at Rivendell? Like we go there and then we go back again. I know that's the Hobbit, but still, right? Whereas and I love that. I love the feeling. I mean, Tolkien really did work hard to make both Hobbiton and Rivendell, for instance, feel very homely, right? I mean, Rivendell is the last homely house. And so whenever I'm reading about it and I'm spending time in Imladris, I'm like, wow, this is just a place I want to be. It's a place that as a reader, I feel just safe and comfortable. Narnia really doesn't have that because in general, these narratives are much more faster paced, right? And so much of the books are about journeys or quests. I mean, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's not any place that we stay and even recuperate. We're always on the move, right? Just like Aslan.
Right.
Prince Caspian is relatively similar as well. The one place they actually do stay is the ruins of Cair Paravel at the very beginning, which I love. I love that part of the book. It might be my favorite part. The Dawn Treader, the boat itself is that, but they're always moving. Silver Chair is a quest. They keep going. Horse and His Boy, same thing. Magician's Nephew, maybe the Wood Between the Worlds, but not really. But here in the last battle, we have this tower, and we're going to see it more after this chapter, that feels like in a dark book, and a sad book, and a book that is the very end of the world, it provides refuge. And some of it's the illustrations. I love the illustration of our 3 characters looking out across the lawn and seeing it. Do you have that in your version? You can take a look at it here if you don't have it.
Unfortunately, I read this one on paper. You were talking about this.
That one right there, I love that one.
This is the first time I'm seeing it.
Okay.
And I'm a little upset that I didn't read it in this
so
Kindle
I'll
color
post
version.
that. Yeah, I'll post that in the episode description, as well as the inside of it as well too.
The one right after
is
it,
really just wonderful, and it feels homely. And we're even told it's not, right? Like inside this tower, Lewis says it's one room. It's literally one room. The staircase literally just goes to the top, but it feels comforting. And I think it's because so little of the book has been comforting. Mm-hmm. This chapter, where really not a lot of very important things happen, as far as if we're looking for some kind of like emotional depth or narrative depth here. No, it's mostly kind of moving the story along, but it provides this respite for us as readers to say, all right, the kids are here. At least they might get better. Now, spoiler alert, they don't get better, but they could. Right? They feel like they might be able to. And so I've always just had a very special place for this tower. And again, we're going to leave the tower and then we're going to come back to it. And so it literally kind of just feels like a home base for us through a good part of this book. And I don't know, I just have always loved it.
Yeah. That's how I felt about the very long beginning of the Lord of the Rings. Just how fun it was to be in that place.
Yeah.
And it makes the story that much more powerful when you have to leave, because now you're leaving the comfort. You understand what that comfort felt like. Yeah. And then by the end, it feels that much better to come back.
You know, back when we had Dr. Baxter on earlier this season, and he talked a little bit. I can't remember if this made it into the episode or not. I have to go back and listen. But I know it might have been just something I read in The Medieval Mind of Lewis. But he talks about Lewis's views of literature as, you know, kind of landscape and atmosphere. And that idea, Lewis writes about it in An Experiment in Criticism. This idea that we shouldn't just be looking at a book for plot or for characters, but instead the medievals, they understood literature a little bit differently, in that they were focused much more on atmosphere and on the literary landscape, is I think one of the terms that Lewis uses here. And I think one of the things that both Tolkien and Lewis do really well is they also are concerned with that. And that's why, you know, let's go over to Tolkien for a moment. That's why so many people come back to The Lord of the Rings, because it has this atmosphere to it that even in my opinion, even other great works of fantasy with great prose and great characters and even a great setting, they don't just match that same level. And it's why it shows up time and time again in people's favorites. Our past guest of the show, Jared Henderson, on his YouTube channel recently, not too long ago, did like a top, like his favorite fantasy books. Mm-hmm. And Jared was like, he was kind of apologetic. He was like, look, I didn't really want to put Lord of the Rings in here, but I just can't deny it. It's like, it feels cliche, but it has to be up there because it's so good. And because, again, Tolkien just has that atmosphere that goes out through it. That's why, at least for me, it's one of those books that I'll just pick up and I'll read for 5 minutes and then be like, oh no, that was like, I'm not reading this book right now. I wanted to just put myself there for 5 minutes, and then I'll put it back on the shelf and I'll read it again a few more months from now in a completely different place. There's very few other books that I do that with. Right.
Yeah.
Can you think of one in particular that stands out to you outside of Tolkien or Lewis?
And this isn't going to be the most unique answer either. And it's different now that I'm older and I've read more stuff. Yeah. Okay. For me, I opened up Harry Potter and I just read a couple of pages and I thought, man, like this, I was right back where I was the first time I read it. And it was so fun to be back in that spot. Now, that happened in late high school, you know, shortly after the 7th book had come out. Yeah. So it wasn't that, we weren't that far removed. But I do remember just opening it up, seeing like, I wonder how this stands up to today. Yeah. And just a random page and maybe like the 3rd book.
Yeah.
It's fun to be drawn back in like that.
I actually think, and I think it's great to answer Harry Potter here, because I know sometimes you and I we're not the hugest, I know that's not, you know, we're not the biggest fans of Harry Potter, but we're not anti-Harry Potter at all. But I think it's just one of those things where I fully never understood the clout that it carries in pop culture. Even to someone who likes the books, I like them a lot. They're great. Yeah. I just, you know, for some people it's like their life, and I'm like, you know, have you read Tolkien?
And maybe that's my life.
Yeah, no, you know, they probably think the same thing about us, and that's totally fine. But I think actually one of the things I was teaching another class on Lewis recently at my school. Not like it was a class for adults. They came out on a weeknight and I was teaching on Lewis and imaginative literature and why we should introduce imaginative literature to students and kind of ask them to stay in it for a little bit longer before they move on to things that are maybe less imaginative. And one of the questions I got during the Q&A session at the end was from a parent who was like, what about Harry Potter? Like, that seems to be like not this generation. It's more like the millennials Narnia or Lord of the Rings or whatever. Like, do you like it? Do you not like it? And I found myself kind of contemplating what you've just said, which is, I don't know that the plot or the characters are nearly as deep as some of these other things. Even things like Wheel of Time, which I'm not even the biggest fan of, but I think Carrie or Dune, I know that's more science fiction, but it's pretty fantasy heavy too, right? Yeah. There's not as much depth. I think the world building is not as strong in Rowling's series, but what's so great is her ability to create an atmosphere. Yeah. I didn't read those books over and over again as a young child because I was desperate to find out about the prophecy of, is it Neville or Harry? Now, I mean, that was cool, I guess. But the parts I kept going back to read over and over again was just them walking between classes. Yes, yeah. Because and that's one of the reasons why, while I like all the movies could never quite capture that. Because if you're taking, The Order of the Phoenix, an 800-page book, and you were condensing it into a 2-hour movie, what are you taking out? Well, I'm taking out the class stuff. I'm taking out the just kids being kids, and that's what Rowling was so good at. Yeah. I think the plot itself was just fine. It was good. Right. It's not bad.
I liked being in that world.
Exactly.
And being in that classroom. And the other stuff was cool. It definitely got me to keep reading, but that's not what I remember. Yeah. And I read those books over and over and over again, and I don't remember a lot of the details about the overall stuff. And I'm actually trying to read it right now very slowly in Spanish. And it's funny.
Harry Potter?
Yeah. It's funny the things that come out that I'm remembering. I'm like, oh, yeah. This was being set up very early on. Like, she's trying to establish this for this overall arc. But what I'm really excited about is just being back at Privet Drive. And
that's not Hogwarts. You want to go to the Privet Drive is where you're excited about.
It's really hard to read in Spanish.
Oh, that's just where you are in the book right now. Okay.
It's really slow.
I'm
just so excited to be back at Hogwarts, but right now this is where I'm at.
My favorite part of you're like the only kid ever is like, my favorite part of the book is when he lives with the abusive family. That's the best part. You're like, this is a weird kid.
Also, clearly didn't finish through chapter 5.
Well, let's spend a little bit more time in England, actually, and let's talk about Eustace's explanation for how they got to Narnia. I kind of want to hear this in your words, Phil, because I do have a little bit more knowledge because I've gone further in the book, obviously. From your perspective, what is happening here?
Well, it sounds like they all got together, they discussed things for quite some time, and they arrived at the conclusion that the best way to get to Narnia was to go get those rings that we just found out about in The Magician's Nephew, if you're reading in publication order. Otherwise, it's been 6 books, and you've probably forgotten about the rings, which is amazing that they remember them and that they haven't used them for so long.
Yeah, and interesting that Diggory at no other point was like, hey,
let me try to get back there.
Go to Narnia. Yeah,
maybe he was like, that was enough.
Yeah, it could have been
done. So they have 2 people dressed as plumbers, and they go to try to break into the house and get the rings. I think they're successful, but then they need to get the rings to the people who can actually go back.
Yes, because Peter has been told, you're not coming back.
You're not coming back.
Same with Edmund and Lucy.
They're trying to be respectful and not even try it, but Eustace is still able to go.
And so is Polly.
Not
Polly, I'm sorry, Jill.
Jill, what's her last?
Joe
Pole. Eustace Scrub. Those are the 2 who can go, and they're going to meet them on the train. And I think 2 people are taking trains to a different place.
So it seems like we don't actually hear this part. It could be that Edmund and Peter have taken another train to meet them somewhere, or Peter and Edmund are just already at this particular station. But they're supposed to meet them at the station. It's just unclear if the station is in London itself or if it's somewhere else and they've both just taken trains to meet here.
And so at this point, does Eustace have the rings? Okay, so they have not been able to get the rings yet.
No, Peter and Edmund have the rings.
And they're trying to meet Peter and Edmund. And before they can meet, then they get whisked away to Narnia.
Why? Tell me about this. Why do you think this happens?
So as I'm just going based on what we read, but I feel like Aslan did them a solid and just teleported them in so they don't have to deal with the rings.
And we've seen this many times that they just go to Narnia. They get whisked away pretty easily.
And they've never had to do the rings before. I also feel like this might set up some other people have the ability to come into Narnia.
They have the rings, they'll be able to come back
later on.
Even though Aslan said you can't.
I don't know about this part. I don't know if you get a pass. Maybe they're gonna like Narnia's ending. It's coming toward the end of the time, so maybe they'll get to see the end of it from a distance, and technically they're in another world. I don't know how this is gonna work, but it's interesting that we heard where the rings are.
Yeah, who
has them, and that's been established. And usually that kind of thing does not get thrown away unless you're in post 2005 TV show.
That's true.
Era where you just have random details that never get addressed again.
Well, also at this point, so interesting thoughts. I just wanted to hear some of your thoughts there, so that's good to know. At this point, now last chapter we alluded to this, but it's now very clear Susan is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, she's out.
What's going on with that?
I don't know, man. Budget.
They couldn't afford it. The actress was like, look, unless I get a better contract, I am not coming back.
You know what I feel like? Here's what I feel. I feel like Susan is pulling a Gwyneth Paltrow right now, where you can't.
I have no idea what that means.
You can't quite tell. Is she still in the MCU? Is she not? Because every now and then they're like, oh yeah, we're having trouble and we're separated, and that's why she's not in this movie or this movie. But then later on, they're back together again. And I don't know if it's a contract thing or if she was completely out and then she came back in, pulled a Natalie Portman where I'm done with the MCU. I really want to be in the MCU again.
Then they make a lot more money. She's like, well, actually.
Hold on now. I have a football team to buy.
Well, tell me this, though. Outside of joking, because obviously we don't, Lewis can put whomever he wants to into these books. Give us a hypothesis, because I know some of our listeners are really going to want to know why you think she's not here. And even if you're wildly wrong, that's kind of the fun of all of it.
The first thing that comes to mind is that she has just moved on from any connection to Aslan.
She's no longer a friend of Narnia. Interesting.
That's unfortunately the first thing that I think of, yeah.
Okay, good to know.
So she kind of has gotten so much distance from it, she doesn't even remember or think about it.
So you think that maybe she doesn't even remember Narnia? Not that she's choosing not to believe in Narnia. But
I think it started with a choice. She chose to forget and focus more on and put away the childish things.
But now she actually doesn't remember.
And then as a result, she doesn't remember anymore.
Well, let's go back to a little detail in the story that was really interesting to me, and it's because I have recently been reading Macbeth out loud to my fifth graders, not my middle schoolers. Phil,
to your 2.5-year-old.
No. And I'm reading a translation, but I do pick up the actual copy of Macbeth to read certain scenes. I'm like, look, you guys got to hear these scenes because they're really great. And even I'll explain a little bit. And it's just a fun read aloud we're doing here at the very end of the year. And as we were getting through Macbeth, I was just reading a little bit. I've only read Macbeth once before. I might have read it in high school too, but I don't remember that. But I've only read it once before as an adult. And I'm reading this translation. It's like Shakespeare for young people. And it's good. It takes out, like the porter's long conversation is not, wildly vulgar in this version and stuff. But
I don't know, man. That's what got me interested.
You're like that. I mean, that's the funniest scene in the whole play. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's hilarious. And actually, I want to mention the porter a little bit because as I was going through Macbeth and read it out loud, I love Shakespeare so much, but Shakespeare's not someone that I feel even remotely comfortable like teaching. I'll read out loud with my kids and we're learning together, but it's not something. I mean, I guess I could teach it to fifth graders, right? Because it's they don't know. But like it's not something like Lewis, where I feel like, hey, I actually have some knowledge to actually share at this point. And so I was reading about Macbeth, and I came across something I was not aware of, which is that Macbeth, being published by Shakespeare in 1603, is at the very beginning, or maybe 1605. But the point is, Queen Elizabeth has passed away, And King James, the King James, the one from the Bible, he is there, and he is now the patron of Shakespeare. And so I did not realize how much of Macbeth is somewhat of like political propaganda, saying, "Look, hey James," because he's the whole Scotland and everything that's going on with Macbeth. There's a lot going on there. So I'm reading about some of this, and I also came across the fact that there is, and again, I did not read Shakespeare's words from the Porter to my fifth graders. Mm-hmm. I would get fired. Didn't do that, but I went back and read it myself because I'm like, it's a hilarious scene. So like I had it, I have a copy here at home, and I was reading it, and the Porter talks about equivocation, right? This idea that there's certain lies that it's either okay to tell in because of justice or in kind of the sense of a greater good, or there's ways of being able to lie, but it's more by withholding truth, right? The things that my 2-year-old likes to do all the time right now. There's that really famous story of St. Francis of Assisi. Who knows if it's true or not, where there's this like guy on the run from a murder, and the guy runs by. Who is being chased by the murderer. And the murderer shows up like, hey, where'd that guy go? Well, St. Francis can't lie to him because lying is a sin. So he takes his hand, he kind of points into his cassock, right, into his thing, and he points the correct direction, but then stares the wrong direction and says, he went that way. So he's not lying.
Oh my gosh.
But it's one of those things like, all right, you're doing the limbo at this point with ethics.
Yeah.
So what I didn't know, okay, because there's all times you read Shakespeare, at least if you're me, you come across words you're like, cool, I've seen that word somewhere before, but I just keep moving because like that's 50% of the words in Shakespeare are I've seen that word, but I don't really remember what it means. But I looked it up this time, and I was thinking about it, and what I didn't know was that Henry Garnet, who is one of the conspirators in the gunpowder plot to kill King James...
Is this on the 5th of November?
This is the 5th of November.
Guy Fawkes?
Yes, although Guy Fawkes, he gets all the credit, but he wasn't even near the top of like those leaders. You had
Hugo Weaving.
There was Natalie Portman again. She's in that one. But no, there's one Catholic priest. I can't remember. He's the one who was like, I think he was like shot and killed. Which whenever I'm like 17th century, I'm like, oh yeah, you do have firearms.
Yeah. They had gunpowder in 900 BC.
Well, the whole thing is called the gunpowder plot. That's what's so funny. I'm like, they had gunpowder back then, But there's also Henry Garnet, and these were a lot of these men were Catholic priests in a time where King James was really kind of railing upon English Catholics as kind of was nowhere near as kind of tolerant as Queen Elizabeth had been towards kind of Protestant and Catholic relations, kind of trying to be ecumenical there. And so, they're going to have this assassination attempt of the king. And I promise it's going somewhere. And so I already had this idea on my mind about lying for the greater good. And so that's kind of where Macbeth is going with all this as he talks and he introduces these people. And Shakespeare has this going on. And because I was reading this recently, obviously, C.S. Lewis is very aware of Shakespeare, right? English literature in the 16th century is a very important piece of work that Lewis works on. And it got me thinking, though, and again, this is a very long lead up to a very simple question, which is that are Edmund and Peter wrong to dress up and sneak into someone else's backyard and dig things up? Or again, could we equivocate this as being something that needs to be done and therefore it's okay that they're doing this?
Has anyone ever successfully answered these kind of questions?
I mean,
in your mind?
I think, yes. I think that maybe at the beginning of the 1600s, no, I'm not convinced by the gunpowder plot. I think when you get to 1940s Germany, yeah. I think when we get to Bonhoeffer and we get to some of these groups of Christians who were really in a weird place ethically, right? You have people planning murder, right? Yeah. Of an evil, and we're not talking about like at war killing. We're talking about like just an assassination attempt, right? Yeah, I think that, and there's other places too, but I think that Christians in Germany in the 1940s, I think, are the place where I feel the most comfortable being like, yeah, I'm actually fine with this. And I think that I don't fully understand how this is, I do believe lying is a sin, but I feel comfortable in my heart with some of what's happening here. Even if with the gunpowder plot, I feel a little bit less so. And maybe that's my own Protestant bias that is, I hope it's not, but I don't know. What about you? I mean, do you think this has ever been answered well?
And I remember having conversations with you about stuff, kind of specifically about the atomic weapons that were used. And I think that everything is way more complicated and complex than when you first asked the question. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of discussion to be had. And I don't know if anyone has ever come up with an answer that's going to satisfy everybody. But I also think you can look at like, what do people actually do? And I think that in this case, dressing up and pretending to be workers in order to sneak into the place is causing a minimal amount.
Sure. And obviously I'm being a little hyperbolic here.
Right. And so like, yeah, maybe technically it's wrong, but there's so much good being done, and so few consequences, like even potential consequences from it. This one feels okay, but it also feels a little bit uncomfortable because that is in a weird way lying.
But see with this, and this is what I have no problem with Lewis including this either. And in fact I love this. I love the fact because I've never read The Last Battle with a group of students before, but if I did, we would just camp out here. Yeah. Because what a great ethical dilemma to have. I think that if I went to a group of 4th, 5th, or 6th graders and I said, what do we think? Are Peter and Edmund in the wrong? I'm like, no, it's not that big of a deal. So then the next question, which is a question that adults can work through too, but Lewis is presenting in a way that's palatable and understandable for young children, is, okay, sure, this is probably fine. Where's the line?
Yeah.
Where is the line that we go from this is okay, that this is too far? Mm-hmm. And that's the question, right, that is much harder to answer. When is just trespassing? Well, now it's more. Now, what a great conversation to have with young readers here. Being able, and again, adult readers, because you and I don't know where I would draw the line. I draw it somewhere between Bonhoeffer. It sounds like to me, I draw it somewhere between Bonhoeffer and the gunpowder plot. It's somewhere in between there is where I draw the line. But I'm still not quite sure about that.
Yeah.
Is that old great story, and I have no idea where it comes from, so I'm not even going to try to cite who tells this story, but of the idea of like, if I gave you $10, right, no one would claim that I'm making you rich. But if I kept giving you $1 a day for however long, eventually you would become rich. And through that lens, at some point you go from not being rich to being rich. And it's $1 at some point that changes that. Yeah. Or is it, right? And so it's a similar kind of thing. It's hard. It's so fuzzy.
Yeah.
By the way, I've pulled up this Bonhoeffer quote. Can I read it to you?
Let's hear it.
This is from a letter that he writes from prison. Bonhoeffer says, "We have been silent witnesses of evil deeds. We have been drenched by many storms. We have learned the arts of equivocation and pretense. Experience has made us suspicious of others and kept us from being truthful and open. Intolerable conflicts have worn us down and even made us cynical. Are we still of any use? What we shall need is not geniuses or cynics or misanthropes or clever tacticians, but plain, honest, and straightforward men. Will our inward power of resistance be strong enough and our honesty with ourselves remorseless enough for us to find our way back to simplicity and straightforwardness?" So this is a little bit off topic from this chapter, but I thought this was such a great place that I wanted to just stop off and have this conversation. Because you read this from Bonhoeffer and you go, wow, like these are not the things we're focused on. We're focused on what's true, what's simple. And I'm sure that in many ways, to relate it back to this chapter, the world that Bonhoeffer was living in, and many people just in the literal entire world at this point, it really did feel like the world was ending. Bonhoeffer's a contemporary of Lewis.
Yeah.
Right? Well, now here we are in Narnia, where it doesn't feel like the world is ending. Lewis told us in the very first sentence of the book, the world is actually ending. And we have this quote by Bonhoeffer to help us try to make sense of this world.
Yeah. I love thinking about the philosophical pieces at play here. Just, that was such a quick moment. They dressed up and they came back, but then thinking about that through that lens is so interesting. It also is such a cool connection that you made with the way it felt like the world was ending. And I've thought about this a lot recently because I have to take these long breaks from the news, and whenever I start reading the news again, I have a couple of different sources, and then I just feel like I'm just like taking in so much great information, just figuring out how this works. I'm learning how this system works, but then it very quickly devolves into like, we are not doing well. Things are not going great. You have all these conflicts with weapons, and then you also have the feels like the destruction of the world as we know it, global warming, all the climate change, all this stuff. And then it's important to remember that it has felt like this at so many points in history. And there are a lot of good things that have happened after those points. And then there have been a lot of regressions that have happened too. But in this case, Narnia is ending. But it's also not the only world.
Yeah.
But it also is a place that we spent so much time.
Yeah. Speaking of news, have you read another former guest of ours? When Father Dan Murata was on the show, we had him on back in season 4 for the Silver Chair. He has a great article that he wrote for the Gospel Coalition called "News as Spiritual Deformation," which I will now put in the link in the episode's description. Kind of what you're talking about is like how is actually the news often not forming us, but deforming us? And how can we then reform ourselves, not necessarily burying our heads in the sand, but being wise about how we engage? And it's a short little article, but something that I think when I was talking to Dan before, I don't know if, this would have been before he published it. I remember him saying something along these lines, and actually and I told him at the time, I believe, that I was kind of taken aback, like, oh, that just seems so radical. And now, but I've kind of been living this way now for 3 or 4 years with kind of the way that I kind of interact with the news and the media in a way that I think has been much more formative. So I'll put that in the link and I'll share it with you too. So you don't have to wait till the episode comes out months from now.
Read it later tonight.
Just wait a bunch later. Yeah, but I will literally, whatever you say next, I'm going to text it to you here. So what do you got for us next while I'm texting you?
Let's take a look here. I loved hearing about all the supplies that they had. They have a dole meal, some hard biscuits. It just sounds terrible, but I think they mean cookies. Is that what you read?
Speaking of what else they mean, did he eat peanut butter earlier in this chapter? When there's like
the
some
weird paste,
the sticky paste. What was that? You think it was peanut butter?
Every trip that I took when I was in Scotland and England, we had egg salad sandwiches.
Is that just a thing out there?
Okay. I imagine egg salad sandwiches.
No, but it's already said egg salad sandwiches, or like some kind of egg sandwiches, right?
They already said eggs, and then they said some kind of paste, and they didn't call it eggs. So it does sound like it was peanut butter.
I think it's peanut butter.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, here as well, too, they decide, as Jill says, I love disguises. They know that they're probably going to have to go back out and they'll need some disguises. And so they dress up as Calormans. And this is a part of the chapter that is something that obviously for us as modern readers, now we're not trying to be chronologically snobbish here, but something that we would probably view much differently now in the 21st century, because they do darken their skin, right, by putting on, what do they put on? I don't even remember what it's called. They just like, what does Lewis say here? They put on some kind of like, I don't know, like, it's not sunscreen, but They put on some kind of, again, not dark paste. They don't put peanut butter on.
It's described as a juice.
A juice.
In a stone bottle, and they rubbed it on their hands and faces.
So they put a juice of some kind on their arms and on their faces in an effort to darken their skin. As we've talked about all the way, really, probably since they were introduced in Dawn Treader, the Calormans have a darker skin complexion than the Narnians do. And so this is kind of a way for them to go about being able to kind of go out into the open while not being captured again. So, and we don't need to retread longer conversations that we've already had on the show, but it is one of those things that, again, if I was reading this with a group of students, right, we might have a little bit of a conversation about like, hey, like that's very different. The way that Lewis is kind of introducing that is really going to be perceived much differently to us in 2023. And not that things like blackface didn't exist in England in the 1950s. They surely did. And I actually had to Google this because I didn't know if it was something just unique to America, particularly the American South, but it was not. It was throughout Western Europe as well, too. So I'm sure outside of there, unfortunately, as well. Another conversation, I think, if you're reading this, I mean, adults can have that conversation, too. You just hopefully don't need someone guiding those conversations, right? But definitely reading this with a group of children just would be thoughtful about how do we talk through that in a way that is dignifying to anyone who does have a darker skin complexion in a way that doesn't feel othering or kind of condescending, which it could come across to some readers.
Right. Well, they complete their disguises. They wrap turbans around the helmets they have. They still leave a little bit of a spike out. And then they have some snacks. They have a pretty dull meal. It sounds like boiling water, salt. They have hard biscuits, which I'm not sure if that means biscuit or cookie. And then Jill wishes for a packet of tea. Eustace wants a tin of cocoa. And then we get Tyrion asking for a firkin of wine
when he's getting
while they're
wine,
wishing for stuff.
And that is the end of the chapter. Well, Phil, that brings us to chapter 6. Next time we're together, we're going to read A Good Night's Work. And in this chapter, Tyrion, Jill, and Eustace set out to rescue Jewel the unicorn.
Oh, good.
So any thoughts as to what might happen here? We've been doing this each chapter for the season.
They'll probably start on the way. They'll get teleported. It'll go a lot faster. They'll untie the unicorn, and then they'll probably get another snack.
There you go. All right. Yeah. So the chapter 6 will end back in the tower now with the unicorn.
So I actually don't think it's going to go very smoothly, and they're going to increase the conflict, put themselves in more peril.
Interesting.
And that will further the plot along.
All right. Good to know. Well, before we head out, we do have an email today from Lexi. She wrote to us about Jadis in the wood between the worlds, a question that you and I walked through or discussed quite a bit at the end of, or not the end, but in the middle of Magician's Nephew, was how did the witch's power work in the wood between the worlds? We kind of disagreed as to what was going on there. Was she losing her power? Was she faking it? Well, Lexi wanted to give us her thoughts as well. Hello, Daniel and Phil. I'm currently listening to your podcast on Chapter 6 of The Magician's Nephew, and you were speculating on why Jadis becomes weak in the wood between the worlds. My own theory is that her powers come from death and destruction, so that she cannot abide a place that is so full of growth and life. This makes sense when you think about the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as well, because she causes it to be always winter, a time of cold, and of the death of plants and other living things. On another note, observant readers would know that Jadis is the same as the White Witch when we meet her in The Magician's Nephew, because in Wardrobe, the note left by Malgrim in Mr. Tumnus's home mentions her Imperial Majesty Jadis, Queen of Narnia. Thank you for all you do. I can't wait to listen to The Last Battle along with you. It's my favorite Narnia of the Narnia books, and I'm hoping to be caught up by the time that season begins. So hopefully she is. Further up and further in, Lexi.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, because she is... Jadis is always trying to destroy stuff. And that also would explain how there's nothing really to destroy in the pool area, when they're like the portal area where they can just go wherever, and she feels weaker there. And it would make sense why the younger worlds are not. It takes her a little bit of time to start messing stuff up.
Yeah.
In order to gain that power.
Yeah, I just also love, I mean, here we are 7 seasons in. I always love the fact that Lewis gives us so many opportunities to just discuss this in ways like we have no idea why.
Right.
It's not really clear, but because he actually gives us so little, Lexi's able to come in here and give some thoughts about where Jadis draws her power from. I'm gonna guess that Lewis doesn't really care where Jadis gets her power from. That's not all to shoot down Lexi's opinion here or her own theory at all. It's the fact that for Lewis, he'd be like, oh, I don't know, she's just evil for the sake of being evil, which Lexi's not saying that she isn't, but Lewis isn't necessarily even saying, well, where do her powers come from? I don't know. She's just evil bad guy. She just has powers. Sure. And so because of that, it kind of allows us that if we want to, like Lexi is doing here, we're able to kind of tell that story. And so I love that. I also am thankful she pointed out to us, one of the things that we'd mentioned is this idea of, hey, do we first find out Jadis's first name in the Magician's Net? Like, do we find out the White Witch's name? But no, we don't. It's actually in chapter 6 of Wardrobe that we're told her name is Her Imperial Majesty Jadis. I don't know if everyone always picks up on that, though, because it's just in that little note. But it is there. It's not hidden or anything. It just isn't. It's not mentioned multiple times. Just that one time, but it is there.
Yeah, and she's not referred to Jadis in that book after that.
No.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that's I'm thankful that Lexi put that out. I don't know if we'd ever talked about that or even recognized that before. So that's great.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
Well, that means it's time for us now to go, Phil. Would you like to go ahead and do the end credits as we wrap up chapter 6 of The Last Battle?
Sure. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be sent to thenarniapodcast@gmail.com. A voicemail can be left at 406-646-6733, just to mix it up a little bit. You can find all of our
you do that?
You can find all of our previous episodes, links, and book information at lampostlistener.com. We'd also appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps other listeners find the show. Thanks for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 6.